Why money? Because calculation and because morals. Money can be spent on a banana taped to a wall, or just destroyed. Regardless, you can do a volunteer act of self-taxation. It's a wonderful mechanism, and it's hard to see it as unfair. It's the money you had. To get it, you had to produce some value or steal it, which also takes risk and effort. Now you wasted it. You taxed yourself. Everybody is happy. In case of money-free models, first, barter. Can barter ever feel fair? 2 rocks for 1 stick, 2 sticks for 1 feather, 2 feathers for 1 flower, 2 flowers for 1 berry. Why 2 flowers for 1 berry and not 3? Why don't you want to take my feathers? I know you don't need them, but look how beautiful they are, and I need that flower. Lots of whys until money emerges. Barter won't ever help evaluate, and it won't ever feel fair. Maybe there's another possible money-free model, one where resources are distributed by government or an algorithm. Will that ever feel fair and satisfy consumers? Let's picture John. He doesn't work, but since there is no money, there is no tool to measure and agree on how much output or value he creates. Let's acknowledge, yes, value and effort are vague, imaginary currencies. But what happens when we don't introduce them? John might be a positive person who lights up the room when he walks in. He rescued a kitten recently and helped an old woman cross a road. Although he doesn't produce anything himself, in the reality where he lives, money-driven shops don't exist, and he can take whatever product he wants for free. But what if he wants to purchase, say, 5,000 bottles of soda to fill his pool? What are the possible solutions? We can define what's a necessity and limit or segregate the accessibility of items. But that's tricky because, say, John is obsessed with soda. Do we try to define what's a mere want and what's an actual need? What if John's mood and well-being crumble because he can't purchase as many bottles as he wants? And if there are no restrictions, how do we deal with John purchasing endless amounts of soda and wasting it for fun? Or maybe worse, to deliberately sabotage our beautiful economy? We may come up with a set of rules on how much stuff can individuals purchase and how much bigger agents like factories can. But it will always be subjective and restrictive. What about luxuries? Forget luxuries. What about cars? Say everybody wants a car and now stays in line to get one. There's not enough cars produced yet. How to define who deserves what? No mechanism of bidding, and as said before, no mechanism of self-taxation. So let's try and introduce points. But how to make it feel fair? Let's calculate John's input into the economy. But how? By the amount of hours he works, or in our case doesn't work? By how tired he gets? By the volume of products he produces? Let's suppose algorithms can do the heavy lifting of money, and they can free people from using money themselves. Let's let AI count whom we owe, who owes us, and distribute stuff correspondingly. But what do we mean by debt? What exactly do we owe? Alright, let's try to come up with something. Let's call it input. But how do we calculate input? What things in what proportions do we take into account? The time? Well, there are jobs that are not that much about the time, like art. So surely not the time alone. The product? Speaking of art, how to calculate the value? I mean, sure, let's say the more views and likes a piece gets, whatever, music, a video, a painting, the more points go to the creator. But how much, say, a catchy song will worth relative to a bottle of soda, and why? Inevitably, those would be subjective decisions, made either by AI or human, just like in money-driven systems. The level of exhaustion? I mean, do we equip everybody with smart bracelets to measure how tired they get? The emotions that the service or product brings? Okay, that's customers' feedback. That might work. Alright, let's accept some crazy formulas for distributing points, that they work. Something like work environment plus impact of the labor on health plus hours of work plus volume of work plus whatever that means plus consumers rate plus views and likes if it's art or content plus the person's abilities plus ton of other variables. But can points be more convenient and feel more fair than just money? How many formulas and arguments should be stacked upon this mess to make it work? Sure, points will be probably harder to steal or to use to harm and destroy. However, is it really simple and more efficient for the purpose of calculation? And again, can it feed the craving for fairness as much as money? I suspect that the human factor eventually wins over the most sophisticated rules. And so why money? Because calculation and because morals. Without a currency, it will be always doomed to be an unfair and inconvenient barter. With currency, it's either money or points being distributed by a godlike AI, and it's just a less convenient, overly complicated kind of currency in an attempt to create a more fair money. We may bicker about what we'd prefer more, when few can get luxuries while some are trying to make ends meet, or when everybody's basic needs are satisfied but nobody can get luxuries. Instead, why not just let people tax themselves? Let suffer, let risk, let fail, let succeed, and just let. And apparently the evolution still prefers it this way. Maybe because there are too many ifs in no-money models. I'm not saying it can't work. The infrastructure and computational powers are there. It probably might work if the world unites, if the rules are well written, if people ditch the old rituals and accept the new ones. And with all that, isn't money just simpler and less of a ritual? Apparently, some kind of currency always has to emerge. Some rituals and feedback loops emerge. So, can something replace the rituals of getting money and using money? Why money? Because calculation and because morals.